to us all. Rowling's stories promote values such as courage and responsibility, and her life proves that imagination is one of the most valuable gifts we are given as human beings. Without imagination, the pleasures of life are lost. Luckily for you all, our guest today has an imagination unlike any other. Rowling did not allow her failures to define her hope for the future. Rather, her stumbling blocks motivated personal reflection, and her hardships gave way to the hopeful tales that we know and love today. In fact, she'll even admit that it was imagination that helped ready her to make the trials bearable and the victories so sweet. Rowling is here today to share about those victories, but more importantly, it was how that failure that created the space for comfort, joy, and peace through means of imagination. As one of her many admirers, I want to thank her for reminding us that imagination is the greatest tool we have in reconciling broken stories. It is this power that may as well be the closest thing we have to real magic in this world. And so, it is my honor to introduce to you all today the most intelligent literary genius of our time, Miss J.K. Rowling.
President Faust, members of the Harvard Corporation and the Board of Overseers, members of the faculty, proud parents, and above all, graduates. The first thing I would like to say is thank you. Not only has Harvard given me an extraordinary honor, but weeks of fear and nausea at the thought of giving this commencement address. Now, all I have to do is take deep breaths, squint at the red banners, and convince myself that I am at the world's largest Gryffindor reunion. I have racked my mind and heart for what I ought to say to you today. I have asked myself what I wish I had known at my own graduation and what important lessons I learned. I have come up with two answers. On this wonderful day when we are gathered together to celebrate your academic success, I have decided to talk to you about the benefits of failure. And as you stand on the threshold of what is sometimes called real life, I want to extol the crucial importance of imagination. Looking back at the 21-year-old that I was at graduation is a slightly uncomfortable experience. I was convinced that the only thing I wanted to do ever was to write novels. However, my parents, neither of whom had been to college, took the view that my overactive imagination was an amusing personal quirk that would never pay a mortgage. I cannot remember telling my parents that I was studying classics. They might well have found out for the first time on graduation day. I cannot criticize my parents for hoping that I would never experience poverty. Poverty entails fear and stress and sometimes depression. Climbing out of poverty by your own efforts, that is indeed something on which to pride yourself. But poverty itself is only romanticized by fools. What I feared most for myself at your age was not poverty, but failure. It's fair to say that by any conventional measure, 7 years after my graduation day, I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage, jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. The fears that my parents had had for me and that I had had for myself had both come to pass. And by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that failure is fun. That period of my life was a dark one. I had no idea then how far the tunnel extended, and for a long time, any light at the end of it was a hope rather than a reality. And so, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. You might never fail on the scale that I did, but sometimes failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. Failure taught me things about myself that I could have learned no other way. The knowledge that you have emerged wiser and stronger from setbacks means that you are, ever after, secure in your ability to survive. You will never truly know yourself or the strength of your relationship until both have been tested by adversity. So, given a time turner, I would tell my 21-year-old self that personal happiness lies in knowing that life is not a checklist of acquisition or achievement. Life is difficult and complicated and beyond anyone's total control, and the humility to know that will enable you to survive its vicissitudes. Now, you might think that I chose my second theme, the importance of imagination, because of the part it played in rebuilding my life, but that is not wholly so. I have learned to value imagination in a broader sense. Imagination is not only the uniquely human capacity to envision that which is not, and therefore the fount of all invention and innovation. In its arguably most transformative and revelatory capacity, it is a power that enables us to empathize with humans whose experiences we have never shared. Unlike any other creature on this planet, humans can learn and understand without having experienced. They can think themselves into other people's places. Of course, this is a power like my own brand of fictional magic that is morally neutral. One might use such an ability to manipulate or control, just as much as to understand or sympathize. Many prefer not to exercise their imaginations at all. They choose to remain comfortably within the bounds of their own experience. They can close their minds and hearts to any suffering that does not touch them personally. They can refuse to know. Choosing to live in narrow spaces leads to a form of mental agoraphobia, and that brings its own terrors. This, written by the Greek author Plutarch, what we achieve inwardly will change outer reality. That is an astonishing statement, and yet proven 1,000 times every day of our lives. It expresses, in part, our inescapable connection with the outside world, the fact that we touch other people's lives by simply existing. If you choose to use your status and influence to raise your voice on behalf of those who have no voice, if you retain the ability to imagine yourself into the lives of those who do not have your advantages, then it will not only be your proud families who celebrate your existence, but millions of people whose reality you have helped change. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. I am nearly finished. I have one last hope for you, Harvard graduates of 2008. Your intelligence, your capacity for hard work, the education you have earned and received give you unique status and unique responsibilities. Even your nationality sets you apart. The great majority of you belong to the world's only remaining superpower. The way you vote, the way you live, the way you protest, the pressure you bring to bear on your government has an impact way beyond your borders. That is your privilege and your burden. I wish you all very good lives. Thank you very much.
House of Thatcher. On deck, we have the House of Barton. And welcome to the stage, the House of Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juan Carlos Garcia, a soldier from the U.S. military. You might be wondering, what is a no-name soldier doing at this event? Let alone, why am I speaking from the platform? The truth is, I'm not just a soldier. I am a husband, a father, a brother, and a friend. And the speaker I have the honor of introducing has enabled me to be all of that while serving our country in the U.S. military. Indeed, our speaker has been of immense impact to the U.S. Armed Forces in many ways. Several of them are personal to me. I remember my 6-month deployment to Iran during the crisis in January 2019. This was a difficult time for me and my family, and I was petrified for us and how this would impact the quality of our lives down the line. I began to regret many decisions and thought I was not ready. Thankfully, the policies drafted by this man ensured my readiness and well-being by providing childcare, mental health resources, and improvement to our family home and support for my wife's career. All of this so I could readily serve my country. Tonight, it is an absolute privilege to introduce our speaker, who is responsible for taking action and helping us to not only be the greatest, but one of the healthiest armies in the world. A man who gave great importance and demonstrated care for the U.S. Army, and personally, a man that helped a person who felt like just another soldier in a huge, powerful army feel as a human being that is not alone. I remain grateful for the human dignity demonstrated as we fought for our country and were deployed for years filled with uncertainty. This man, who promotes inclusion and equal opportunity to all, has used an authoritative charge and control to truly make change and impact the military and our whole country. Ladies and gentlemen, the American Manufacturing Executive, our 23rd Secretary of the Army, and the 27th United States Secretary of Defense. Please welcome Mark Thomas Esper.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. I want to say a big thank you to the Heritage Foundation for hosting this discussion about the successes of the Department of Defense and the challenges we face when it comes to implementing the National Defense Strategy in this era of great power competition. Today, our strategic competitors, China and Russia, are attempting to erode our hard-earned gains as they undermine international rules and norms and use coercion against other nations for their own benefit. We continue to see this behavior globally, from Beijing's predatory economics and its aggression in the South and East China Seas, to Moscow's violations of international obligations and the sovereignty of its neighbors. When I was confirmed as a Secretary of Defense in 2019, I made my top priority the irreversible implementation of the National Defense Strategy. This strategy guides our work to protect comparative and competitive advantages and defend a free and open global order along 3 lines of effort. Today, I'd like to highlight our efforts on another top 10 goal, achieving higher levels of sustainable readiness. First, it is important to define what readiness really means for the United States Armed Forces. Simply put, readiness refers to our military's ability to answer the nation's call and to fight and win, anytime, anywhere. It is comprised of the training and equipment we provide to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and space professionals, as well as the deployment and maintenance schedules that drive our operations, and the way that we keep our service members physically strong and mentally tough. The bottom line is that each part of the readiness cycle is vital to preparing and enabling our men and women in uniform to successfully execute their mission. The question we must answer is this: if called upon to fight tonight, are we ready? Today, given our efforts over the past few years, I'm fully confident that the answer to this question is a resounding yes. I want to show through a historical example how we learned the hard way the costs of not being ready. In July 1950, at the beginning of the Korean War, an understrength infantry battalion and an artillery battery of close to 500 American soldiers rapidly deployed to the outbreak of that conflict to a position north of Osan, South Korea, to delay the invading North Korean forces. These men, known as Task Force Smith, arrived without the standard kit of a regimental combat team. Moreover, they had very little ammunition. Their training was inadequate. Few of them had any combat experience, and their anti-tank weapons were ineffective. Yet, they would soon encounter thousands of enemy forces and dozens of North Korean tanks. Task Force Smith was forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties in the process. The Battle of Osan demonstrated the tragic consequences of leadership's failure to understand the mission and their responsibilities, leaving American troops unprepared, with obsolete equipment and heavily outmanned. For many years, the training imperative of the Army was no more Task Force Smiths. The lessons we learned about the importance of readiness remain with us. Over the past few years, the department has refocused and restored readiness in accordance with the NDS along three major categories: people, policy, and performance. A critical factor in our readiness is the size and composition of our deployable force, which we now track in ways we never did before. We have added nearly 30,000 military personnel to our ranks since 2016 and made great gains. We are doing everything in our power to balance the inexorable demands of overseas deployment with readiness and our service members' commitments at home. One of our first tasks before we make a decision to send forces abroad is to determine how the deployment will impact their work-life timelines. By increasing and monitoring these deploy-to-dwell thresholds, we are working to make sure that every warfighter and unit gets adequate time to recover from their last deployment, is well trained and prepared for their next one, and on a more personal note, experiences more important moments in their families' lives. We aim to do all this while enabling the services to continue to generate enough readiness for both today and tomorrow. Key to our people's ability to execute their mission is their resiliency and well-being. This is why we continue to take steps to improve service members' quality of life, including by expanding the availability of childcare, helping spouses sustain their careers, improving housing, and providing mental health resources and other support. It is also why we remain focused on reinforcing ethical leadership across the force, fostering trust in the chain of command, and promoting inclusion and equal opportunity for all. Looking ahead, I'm confident that the department, civilian and military leaders are aligned to deliver more sustainable readiness. The department's vision of readiness is one in which our people are focused on great power competition from day one and trained to deter and prevail in the high-end fight, while able to perform across the full spectrum of global operations. It is a vision in which our people have the resources they need when they need them, so that they never find themselves in a fair fight. We must and we will maintain our decisive overmatch well into the future. Thanks to the hard work of our men and women in uniform, and with the support of Congress, industry, and our like-minded partners, the United States military will continue to honor that vision and strengthen our readiness now and in the years to come. Thank you.
Bonhoeffer. On deck, we have the House of Winston Churchill, and up on stage, please welcome the House of Clara Barton.
Good evening, all, and welcome to the Women's Rights Convention of 1851. convention was merely a year ago, but oh, what progress we have made since then. Our cause has gathered a huge amount of recognition and support, and we have no plans to slow down or turn back now. A decade ago, we could not have imagined ourselves where we are today. But here we stand, the children of our great republic and the leaders of our next generation. My name is Abby Hills Price, and I am honored to be invited to speak to you all at this convention as we continuously fight for the equality of those who have pushed down for far too long. Before giving my own thoughts about the current circumstances of our society, I first want to introduce you to our next speaker, Clarina Howard Nichols. Clarina's voice is integral in the battle we are currently facing. After a tumultuous marriage, Clarina was forced to single-handedly support both herself and her children while receiving nearly a woman's wage, which, as we know, is only 1/3 of what men receive. Consequently, she began to write for a local newspaper in her home state of Vermont, where she was exposed to women's rights activities and eventually inspired to involve herself in the fight for equality. Although Clarina herself was privileged enough to be educated more than the average woman of today's time, she both recognizes and advocates for the importance of this education as a right for all women everywhere. She recognizes that we must embrace this necessary turning point. As women, we are constantly told that we do not have certain rights. Everything we own actually belongs to our husbands, and even in his passing, is passed around us straight down to our sons. It is time for this to change. It is time for us to take control of the fruits of our labor, to retain what we fairly earn, and to fully embrace our God-given capacities as guardians and nurturers of our offspring. The question I then pose to you is this: how can we do any of this if we are fully reliant on our fathers and husbands, if we ourselves aren't educated and ready to take on our roles in life? I am incredibly honored to both know and learn from this woman. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Clarina Howard Nichols.
I commenced life with the most refined notions of the woman's sphere. But friends, it is only since I have met the varied responsibilities of life that I have truly comprehended woman's sphere. And I have come to regard it as lying within the whole circumstance of humanity. But I may not longer dwell on woman's sphere. I shall say very little of woman's rights. But I would lay the axe at the root of the tree. I would impress upon you woman's responsibilities and the means fitly to discharge them before heaven. I stand before you a mother, a sister, a daughter, filling every relation that is given to woman to fill. And by the token that I have a husband, a father, and brothers, whom I revere for their manliness and love for their tenderness, I may speak to you with confidence and say, I respect manhood. I love when it aspires to the high destiny which God has opened to it. And it is because I have this confidence in manhood that I am here to press upon it the claims of womanhood. My first claim for woman is the means of education, that she may understand and be able to meet her responsibilities. We are told very much of woman's mission. Well, every mission supposes a missionary. It is you, fathers, husbands, who are responsible for this instruction. Your happiness is equally involved with ours. Yourselves must reap the harvest of our ignorance or knowledge. If we suffer, you suffer also. Both must suffer or rejoice in our mutual offspring. I would say, in reference to the rights of woman, it has become forgotten that, as the mother of the race, her rights are the rights of men also, the rights of her sons. It is on behalf of our sons, the future men of the Republic, as well as for our daughters, its future mothers, that we claim the full development of our energies by education and legal protection in the control of all the issues and profits of ourselves, called property. I address myself to you, fathers. I appeal to every man who has lived a half century. If you were going on a long journey, to be absent for years, would you exclude your wives from the care and guardianship of your children? If you would, then you have married beneath yourselves. Then I ask you how it happens that when you die, your estates are cut up, and your children and the means for their support consigned to others' guardianship, by laws which yourselves have made or sworn to defend. Do you reply that women are not qualified by education for the business transactions involved in such guardianship? It is for this I ask that we may be educated. Yourselves must educate your wives in the conduct of your business. My friends, love is the best teacher in the world. Call woman to your side in the loving confidence of equal interests and equal responsibilities, and she will never fail you. But I would return to woman's responsibilities and the laws that alienate her means to discharge them. And here let me call your attention to my position, that the law which alienates the wife's rights to the control of her own property, her own earnings, lies at the very foundation of all her social and legal wrongs. The alienation of this right defrauds her of the legal guardianship of her children. It defrauds her of the means of discharging her responsibilities to her children and to society during the husband's life, and consumes her earnings in the indulgence of idle and sinful habits. We ask for equal property rights by the repeal of the law which diverts the earnings of the wife from herself and her heirs. Oh, men, in the enjoyment of well-secured rights, you beautify your snug homesteads and say within your hearts, here I may sit under my own vine and fig tree. Here have I made my home in my old age. And it never occurs to you that no such blissful feeling of security finds rest in the bosoms of your wives. We claim that men have proved themselves incompetent to be the judge of our needs. His laws concerning our interests show that his intelligence fails to prescribe means and conditions for the discharge of our duties. We are the best judges of the duties as well as the qualifications appropriate to our own Department of Labor, and should hold within our own hands, in our own right, the means for acquiring the one and comprehending the other. But alas, not yet have I exhausted the fountain of wrongs growing out of the alienation of the wife's property rights. By the laws of all these United States, the father is in all cases the legal guardian of the child in preference to the mother. Hence, in cases of divorce for the criminal conduct of the father, the children are confined by the natural operation of the laws to the guardianship of the criminal party. Now, my friends, you will bear me witness that I have said nothing about woman's right to vote or to make laws. I have great respect for manhood, and I wish to be able to continue to respect it. I labor and hope, for I have faith that when men come to value their own rights as means of human happiness rather than of paltry gain, they will feel themselves more honored in releasing than in retaining the inalienable rights of women. Brothers, you ask us to accept the protection of your love, and the law says that it is sufficient for us, whether it feeds us or it robs us of our bread. You admit that woman exceeds man in self-sacrificing love. Her devotion to you has passed into a proverb. Yet for all this, you refuse to entrust your interests to that love. You do not feel safe in your interests without the protection of equal laws. You refuse to trust even the mother's love with the interest of her children. How then do you ask of us to dispense with the protection of equal laws and accept instead the protection of man's affection? I would offer in conclusion a few thoughts on education. I would say to my sisters, lest they be discouraged under existing disabilities from attempting it, we can educate ourselves. It may be that you hesitate from a supposed inferiority of intellect, but let us survey woman's responsibilities. Within the narrowest sphere to which any common sense man would limit her offices, as a mother. Her powers mold and develop humanity, intellectual, moral, and physical. Next to God, woman is the creator of the race as it is and as it shall be. I ask then, has God created woman, man's inferior? If so, he has been false to his wisdom and false to his power in creating an inferior being for superior work. But if it be true, as all admit, that woman's responsibilities are equal to man's, then I claim that God has endowed her with equal powers for their discharge. And how shall we develop these powers? My sister, for your encouragement, I will refer to my own experience in the matter. I consider myself to be self-educated. Prevented by circumstances from availing myself to the discipline of a classical school of the highest order, I resorted to books and the study of human nature. The world in which we live and by which we are impressed is the best school for woman as well as man. Practical life furnishes the best discipline for our powers. It qualifies us to take life as we find it and leave it better than we found it. In the light of experience, I would say to you, my sisters, the first thing is to apply ourselves to the intelligent discharge of present duties, diligently searching out and applying all knowledge that will qualify us for higher and extended usefulness. Be always learners, and don't forget to teach. I cannot leave this subject without briefly calling your attention to another phase of education. Early in my life, my attention was called to examine the value of beauty and accomplishments as permanent grounds of affection. I could not believe that God had created so many homely women and suffered all to lose their beauty in the very maturity of their powers, and yet made it our duty to spend our best efforts in trying to look pretty. We all desire to be loved. And can it be that we have no more lasting claim to admiration than that beauty and those accomplishments which serve us only in the springtime of life? Surely our days of dancing and musical performance are soon over, when musical instruments of much sweeter tone cry, "Mother." What then shall we do for admiration when stricken in years? My sister, I can only find lasting charms in that through the culture of our minds and our hearts, which will enable us to win upon man's higher and better nature. If you have beauty and accomplishments, these address themselves to a man's lower nature, and when age has robbed you of the one, you are left unloved and unlovely. Cultivate then your powers of mind and heart, that you may become necessary to his better and undying sympathies. Then will his soul respond to your worth, and the ties that bind you endure through time and make your companionship in eternity. So, let the daughters be trained for their responsibilities. If you educate them for practical life by giving them general, useful knowledge, their husbands can teach them the details of their mutual business interests, as easily as the new responsibilities of maternity will teach them the ways and means of being qualified to discharge its duties. Educate your daughters for practical life, and you have endowed them better than if you had given them fortunes. When a young girl of 14, I said to my father, "Give me education instead of a setting out in the world, if you can give me but one. If I marry and am poor in this world's goods, I can educate my children myself. If my husband should be so unfortunate, the sheriff come and take his goods, no creditor can take the capital invested here. And my education has not only been bred, but an inexhaustible fund of enjoyment in all the past of my life." Thank you.
Thank you, Barton. We're gonna try to fix the stand really quick before Churchill comes up. Hold one moment. you. Just a reminder, we're just fixing the stand. We have one more house to go, so if you leave now, you won't get credit. Just throwing that out there. This is not your time to leave. All right, we are going to keep this going. Thank you for your patience. Maddie, I'm so sorry that happened. Everybody else, we have a new stand. So, up next, please welcome the House of Winston Churchill.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Andrew Carnegie, and it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce you all to my great friend, Booker T. Washington. Washington is an educator, author, orator, advisor to our nation's leaders, and founder of the Tuskegee Institute, to name a few. He is a great man who, after many letters back and forth, was able to persuade me into investing $20,000 towards building a new library for his school. I was very honored at the chance to support him and all he stands for. I am more thankful for his friendship, which has blossomed from it. But enough about me. In this great year of 1896, my friend is here to speak on the relationship between all of humankind, especially between that of North and South and the United States of America. We know the wounds are still fresh from our division brought about by slavery, but we must not put one another down in these trying times. We must, as Washington will elaborate on, care for one another and seek to lift up each other every day. He will speak on the education of our youth in both the North and the South, and he will call for action and the promotion of democracy and education for all. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to my friend, Booker T. Washington.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it is said that the strongest chain is no stronger than its weakest link. In the southern part of our country, there are 22 million of your brethren who are bound to you by ties which you cannot tear. The most intelligent man in your community has his intelligence darkened by the ignorance of a fellow citizen. In the Mississippi bottoms, the most wealthy in your city would be more wealthy, but for the poverty of a fellow being in the Carolina rice swamps. The most moral and religious among you has his religion and morality modified by the degradation of the man in the South, whose religion is mere matter of form and emotionalism. When the South is poor, you are poor. When the South commits crime, you commit crime. My friends, there is no mistake. You must help us raise the character of our civilization, of yours, or yours will be lowered. The central idea which I wish you to help me consider is the reaching and lifting up of the lowest, most unfortunate, negative element that occupies so large a proportion of our territory and composes so large a percentage of our population. It seems to me that there never was time in the history of our country when those interests in education should be more earnestly considered. To what extent? The knowledge of literature and science makes producers lovers of labor, independent, honest, unselfish, and above all, supremely good. Call education by what name you please, and if it fails to bring about these results among the masses, it falls short of its highest end. The science, the art, the literature that fails to reach down and bring the humblest up to the fullest enjoyment of the blessings of our government is weak, no matter how costly the buildings used or how modern the methods in instruction employed. How I wish that from the most humble log cabin schoolhouse in Alabama, we could burn, as it were, in the hearts and heads of all. Putting the thought more directly as it applies to conditions in the South. The North and West are divided. There are 5 million votes to be cast in the South, and of this number, 1/2 are ignorant. Not only are 1/2 the voters ignorant, but because of this ignorant vote, corruption, dishonesty in a dozen forms have crept into the exercise of political franchise, to the extent that the conscience of the intelligent class and its attempt to defeat the will of ignorant voters. Here then, on the one hand, you have ignorant vote, and on the other hand, an intelligent vote minus a conscience. The time may not be far off when this kind of jury we shall have to look for the verdict that is to decide the course of our democratic institutions. The ignorant race is tempted to jump at one bound to the position that has required years of hard struggle for others to reach. It seems to me that the temptation in education in missionary work is to do for a people 1,000 miles away without always making a careful study of the needs and conditions of the people whom we are trying to help. The temptation to run all people through a certain educational mold, regardless of the condition of the subject or the end to be accomplished. Unfortunately for us as a race, our education was begun just after the war, too nearly where New England education ended. We seem to overlook the fact that we were dealing with a race that has little love for labor in their native land and consequently brought little love for labor with them to America. Added to this was the fact that they had been forced for 250 years to labor without compensation, under circumstances that were calculated to do anything but teach them the dignity, beauty, and civilization power of intelligent labor. We forgot the industrial education that was given the Pilgrim Fathers of New England in clearing and planting its cold, bleak, and snowy hills and valleys and providing shelter, founding the small mills and factories and supplying themselves with homemade products, thus laying the foundation of an industrial life that now keeps going a large part of the colleges and missionary effort of the world. At least 80% of my pupils in the South are found in the rural districts, and they are dependent on agriculture in some form for their support. Notwithstanding, in this instant, we have a whole race depending upon agriculture. Notwithstanding 30 years have passed since our freedom, aside from what we have done at Hampton and Tuskegee and 1 or 2 other institutions, not a thing has been attempted by state or philanthropy in a way of educating the race, this industry on which their very existence depends. Boys have taken from the farms and educated in law, theology, in Hebrew and Greek, educated in everything else but the very subject they should know the most about. I question whether or not among all the educated colored people in the United States, you can find 6 if we accept the institution named that have received anything like a thorough training in agriculture. It would have seemed since self-support and industrial independence are the first conditions for lifting up any race, that education in theoretical and practical agriculture, dairying and stock raising should have occupied the first in our system. Some time ago, when we decided to make tailoring a part of our training at the Tuskegee Institute, I was amazed to find that it was almost impossible to find the whole county an educated colored man who could teach the making of clothing. I could find them by the score who could teach astronomy, theology, Greek, or Latin, but almost none who could instruct in the making of clothing, something that has to be used by every one of us every day. A short time ago, in one of our southern cities, a colored man died who had received training as a skilled mechanic during the days of slavery. By his skill in his industry, he had built up great business as a house contractor and builder. In this same city, there are 35,000 colored people, among them young men who have been well educated in languages and literature, but not a single one could be found who had been trained in architectural and mechanical drawing that could carry on the business which his ex-slave has built up, and so it was soon scattered to the wind. Aside from the work done in the institutions that I have mentioned, you will find no colored men who have been trained in the principles of architecture, notwithstanding the vast majority of the race without homes. Here then are the three prime conditions for growth to civilization: food, clothing, and shelter. Yet we have been the slaves of form and custom to such an extent that we have failed in a large measure to look matters squarely in the face and meet actual needs. You cannot graft a 15th century civilization onto a 20th century civilization by the mere performance of mental gymnastics. Understand, I speak in no fault-finding spirit, but with a feeling of deep regret for what has been done. But the future must be an improvement on the past. Each colored child had spent on him this year for his education about 50 cents, while one of your children had spent on him this year for education not far from $20. And yet each citizen of this country is expected to share the burdens and privileges of our democratic form of government, just as intelligently and consciously as the citizens of your beloved Kings County. A vote in this county means as much to the nation as a vote to the city of Boston. Crime in this county is as truly as narrow, aimed at the heart of the government, as crime committed in your own streets. Do you know that a single schoolhouse built this year in a town near Boston to shelter 300 students has cost more for building alone than will be spent for the education, including buildings, apparatus, teachers of the whole colored school and the population of Alabama? I have referred to industrial education as a means of fitting the millions of my people in the South for the duties of citizenship. Until there is industrial independence, it is hardly possible to have a pure ballot. I'm going to say that again. Until there is industrial independence, it is hardly possible to have a pure ballot. In the country districts of the Gulf states, it is safe to say that not more than one Black man in 20 owns the land he cultivates, where so large a proportion of the people are dependent, live in other people's houses, eat other people's foods, and wear clothes they have not paid for. It is a pretty hard thing to tell how they were going to vote. My remarks thus far have referred mainly to my own race, but there is another side. The longer I live and the more I study the question, the more I'm convinced that it is not as much a problem as to what you will do with the African American as what the African American will do with you and your civilization. And considering this side of the subject, I thank God that I have grown to the point where I can sympathize with a white man as much as I can sympathize with a Southern white man as much as I can sympathize with a Northern white man. To me, a man's a man for that and that. As bearing upon democracy and education, what of your white brethren in the South, those who suffered and are still suffering the consequences of American slavery? For both of you are responsible. You of the great, prosperous North still owe to your unfortunate brethren of the Caucasian race in the South, not less than yourselves, a serious and uncompleted duty. What was the task you asked them to perform? Returning to their destitute homes after years of war to face blasted hopes, devastation, a shattered industrial system. You ask them to add to their own burdens that of preparing in education, politics, and economics in a few short years. For citizenship, 4 million of former slaves. That the South, staggering under the burden, made blunders, that in a measure, that there has been disappointment. No one need be surprised. The educators, the statesmen, the philanthropists have never comprehended their duty toward the millions of poor whites in the South who were buffeted for 200 years between slavery and freedom, between civilization and degradation, who were disregarded by both master and slave. It needs no prophet to tell the character of our future civilization when the poor white boy in the country districts of the South receives $1 worth of education and your boy $20 worth. When one never enters a library or reading room and one other never has a library or reading room in every ward in town. My friends, can we make our education reach down far enough to touch and help this man? Can we so control science, art, and literature as to make them to such an extent means rather than an end? The lowest and most unfortunate of God's creatures shall be lifted up. Education, whether a Black man or a white man, it gives one physical courage to stand in front of the cannon and fails to give him moral courage to stand up in defense of the right and justice. With all that the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences stands for its equipment, its endowment, its wealth and culture, its instructors, can it produce a mother that will produce a boy that will not be ashamed to have the world know that he is a friend to the most unfortunate of God's creatures? My friends, who blasted the life of this young man, on whose hands does this blood rest? Our system of education or want of education is responsible. Can our public schools and colleges turn out a set of men that will throw open the doors of industry to all men everywhere, regardless of color? So all shall have the same opportunity to earn $1. They now have to spend $1. I know good many species of cowardice and prejudice, but I know none equal to this. I do not know who is the worst, the ex-slaveholder who perforce compelled his slave to work without compensation, or the man who perforce compels the Black man to refrain from working for compensation. My friends, we are one in this country. The question of the highest citizenship and complete education of all concerns nearly 10 million of my own people and over 60 million of yours. We rise as you rise. When we fall, you fall. When you are strong, we are strong. When we are weak, you are weak. There is no power that can separate our destiny. The African American can afford to be wronged. The white man cannot afford to do wrong to him. Unjust laws or customs that exist in many places regarding the races injure the white man and inconvenience the Black man. No race can wrong another race simply because it has the power to do so without being permanently injured in morals. The Black man can endure the temporary inconvenience, but the injury to the white man is permanent. It is for the white man to save himself from his degradation that I plead. If a white man steals a Black man's ballot, it is the white man who is permanently injured. Physically, death comes to the Black man, lynched in a county, but death of the morals, death of the soul comes to the thousands responsible for lynching. We are a patient, humble people. We can afford to work and wait. There is plenty in this country for us to do so. Away up in the atmosphere of goodness, patience, long-suffering, and forgiveness, the workers are not many or overcrowded. If others would be little, we can be great. If others would be mean, we can be good. If others would push us down, we can help push them up. Character, not circumstances, makes the man. It is more important that we be prepared for voting than that we vote. More important that we be prepared to hold office than that we hold office. More important that we be prepared for the highest recognition than we to be recognized. Those who fought and died on the battlefield performed their duty heroically and well, but a duty remains for you and me. And the mere meaning of law could not make more an ignorant voter could not make one citizen respect another. These results come to the African American as to all races. by beginning at the bottom and working up to the highest civilization and accomplishment. In the economy of God, there can be but one standard by which an individual can succeed. There is but one for a race. This country demands that every race measure itself by the American standard. By it, a race must rise or fall, succeed or fail, and in the last analysis, mere sentiment counts but little. During the next half century and more, my race must continue passing through the severe American crucible. We are to be tested in our patience, in our forbearance, our power to endure wrong, to withstand temptation, to succeed, to acquire and use skill, our ability to compete, to succeed in commerce, to disregard the superficial for the real, the appearance for the substance, to be great and yet the servant of all. This is the passport to all that is best in the life of our republic. And the African American must process it or be debarred. In working out our destiny, while the main burden and center of activity must be with us, we shall need, in a large measure, to help the encouragement, the guidance that the strong can give the weak. Thus helped, we of both races in the South shall soon throw off the shackles of racial, sectional prejudice, and rise above the clouds of ignorance, narrowness, and selfishness into that atmosphere, that pure sunshine, where it will be our highest ambition to serve man, our brother, regardless of race, or past conditions. Thank you.
All right. So if you were in here for all 5 speeches, that's the key here. If you came in halfway through, you cannot get credit. But if you were in here for all 5 speeches, please find an Interregnum committee member. We are wearing tan shirts, or a liaison wearing a lanyard, and get checked in on Sparrow as quick as possible. If you can't do that before you leave, wait, don't stand up yet, guys. Please find your liaison in your wardroom to get your credit. For the next section, if you are not in the house of Reagan, Ten Boom, Lewis, Anthony, or Elizabeth, you cannot be in the city room. You have to go watch from your wardrooms. It's just because of capacity limits. So please find somebody, get checked in, and try to filter out as soon as possible so we can start the next section.
Great job, Julia.
Don't worry.
Hey, Chad. Good Chad.
What? Oh my gosh. I like taking it in front. That's fine. Right? Do it. Megan, Megan.
I did not expect that.
Hello. And you guys are first on deck, so go ahead and sit in those 2 chairs over there. You're gonna go sit in those 2 chairs. You're first on deck. Megan, what? Oh, you're here. I'm on the show. Where's Joe? We're gonna start as soon as we can find. Maybe snacks? I will check the founder's room. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna start section B great speech. I don't know if you guys were watching last time. The way this is going to work is we're going to have a house speaking. So up first will be Reagan. And before I announce who is speaking, I will say who is on deck. And when you're on deck, your two speakers are going to sit in those two chairs over there, just so you have easier access to the stage. So, like I said, up first, please welcome the House of Ronald Reagan.
Good morning, and congratulations to UT class of 2014. Today, I have the great pleasure of announcing one of America's finest, a Navy SEAL, Admiral William H. McRaven. I remember his first day in Coronado. I hollered my worst, trying to break his spirit, trying to make him quit. But McRaven would not give me the pleasure. Not even after 6 grueling months. Now, William McRaven is a 4-star admiral and commanded the Osama bin Laden raid. Is McRaven insane? Why would he not spare himself the pain, the sleepless nights, and agony of trying to please those who wished he would just give up? I am sure McRaven would love to answer these questions, but allow me to briefly offer my thoughts. Trust me, I've seen the faces of those who quit, and I've shaken the hands of those who become admirals. McRaven is insane. Insane because he cares about your futures as you graduate from UT and enter a new chapter in your life. Insane because he refuses to throw in the towel. Insane because he dares to change the world. So now, without further ado, please welcome me in welcoming General Admiral William H. McRaven.
Class of 2014, congratulations on your achievement. It's been almost 37 years to the day that I graduated from the University of Texas. I remember a lot of things about that day. I remember I had a throbbing headache from a party the night before. I remember I had a serious girlfriend whom I later married. That's important to remember, by the way. And I remember that I was getting commissioned into the Navy that day. But of all the things that I remember, I don't have a clue who the commencement speaker was. So if I can't make this commencement speech memorable, I'll at least try to make it short. The University of Texas's slogan is, "What starts here changes the world." Tonight, there are almost 8,000 students graduating from the University of Texas. The average American will meet 10,000 people in their lifetime. That's a lot of folks. But if every one of you changed the world, you would change the lives of just 10 people. And each one of those folks changed the lives of another 10 people, just 10. Then in 5 generations, the class of 2014 will have changed the lives of 800 million people. 800 million people. It's over twice the population of the United States. One more generation, and you can change the entire population of the world. If you think it's hard to change the lives of just 10 people, you're wrong. I saw it happen every day in Iraq and Afghanistan. A young army officer makes a decision to go left instead of right down a road in Baghdad, and the 10 soldiers in his squad are saved from an ambush. In Afghanistan, a non-commissioned officer from the female engagement team senses something isn't right and directs the infantry platoon away from a 500-pound IED, saving the lives of dozens of soldiers. But if you think about it, not only were these soldiers saved by the decisions of one person, but their children, yet unborn, were saved. And their children's children were saved. Generations were saved by just one decision, by one person. What would the world look like after you change it? Well, I'm confident that'll look much better, but if you will humor this old sailor for just a moment, I have a few suggestions that may help you on your way to a better world. I've been a Navy SEAL for 36 years. But it all began after I left UT for SEAL training. SEAL training is 6 months of long, torturous runs in soft sand, midnight swims in the cold water, days without sleep and being cold, wet, and miserable. It is 6 months of being constantly harassed by warriors who seek to find the weak of mind and body and eliminate them from ever becoming a Navy SEAL. But the training also seeks to find those students who can lead in an environment of chaos, stress, and hardships. So here are the lessons I learned from becoming a Navy SEAL and SEAL training that hopefully will be of value to you as you move forward in life. Every morning in SEAL training, my instructors would show up in my barracks room, and the first thing they would inspect was your bed. The corner square, the covers pulled tight, the pillow centered just under the headboard, and an extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bed. It was a simple task, but every morning we were required to make our bed to perfection. It seemed a little ridiculous at times, but the wisdom of this simple act has been proven to me many times over. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride and will encourage you to do another task and another and another. By the end of the day, the one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you can never do the big things right. If you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. Every day during training, you were challenged by multiple physical events, something designed to test your mettle. Every event has standards, times you had to meet, and if you failed to meet those standards, your name was posted on a list. And at the end of the day, those on the list were invited to a circus. A circus was 2 hours of additional calisthenics designed to wear you down, to break your spirit, and to force you to quit. No one wanted a circus. At some time during SEAL training, everyone made the circus list. But an interesting happened to those who were constantly on the list. Over time, those students who did an extra 2 hours of calisthenics got stronger. The pain of the circuses built inner strength and physical resiliency. Life is filled with circuses. You will fail. You will likely fail often. It will be painful. It will be discouraging. It will test your will to the very core. But if you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the instructors joyfully briefed the trainees on the different species of sharks that inhabit the waters. They assure you, however, that no student has been eaten by a shark, at least not recently. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground, do not swim away, do not act afraid, and if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summon up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So, if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks. The 9th week of training is referred to as Hell Week. It is 6 days of no sleep and one special day at the mud flats. The mud flats are an area where the mud will engulf you. Wednesday evening, my training class was ordered into the mud. The mud consumed each man till there was nothing visible but our heads. Looking around the mud flat, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was still over 8 hours until the sun comes up. The chattering teeth and shivering moans of the trainees were so loud it was hard to hear anything. And then one voice began to echo through the night. One voice raised in song. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became two, and two became three. And before long, everyone in the class was singing. We knew that if one man could rise above the misery, then others could as well. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept up the singing, but the singing persisted. And somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away. If I've learned anything from my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope. The power of one person, a Washington, Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world just by giving people hope. So if you want to change the world, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. Finally, in SEAL training, there's a bell, a brass bell that hangs in the center of the compound for all the students to see. All you have to do is quit by ringing the bell. Ring the bell and you no longer have to wake up at 5 o'clock. You no longer have to do the freezing cold swims. Ring the bell and you no longer have to do the runs, the obstacle course, the PT, and you no longer have to endure the hardships of training. Just ring the bell. If you want to change the world, don't ever ring the bell. To the graduating class of 2014, the class that can affect the lives of 800 million people in the next century. Start each day with a task completed. Find someone to help you through your life. Respect everyone. Know that life is not fair and that you will fail often. But if you take some risks, step up when the times are toughest, face down the bullies, lift up the downtrodden, and never, ever give up. If you can do these things, then the next generation and generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one that we have today. And what started here will indeed have changed the world for the better. Thank you very much. Welcome, horns.
Thank you, House of Reagan. On deck, we have the House of C.S. Lewis. And please welcome to the stage. Please welcome to the stage the House of Corrie ten Boom.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Frances Sturgested, and I am the chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. We are here today to honor the recipient of the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize. Following her contribution to the revolutionary movement for democracy in 1988 and subsequent recognition by the European Parliament, it is my honor to award Her Excellency, Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi, for her nonviolent struggle for democracy and human rights. The 8888 Uprising, also known as the People Power Uprising, was a series of nationwide protests, marches, and riots in Burma that peaked in August 1988. Ms. Suu Kyi in Burma, with her dying mother, was outraged by the massacres of the protesters by the government. In the same year, a spontaneous revolt broke out against 26 years of political repression and economic decline. So she began to speak out. She created a party, the National League for Democracy, and soon had a number of supporters. Although the government tried to suppress her, she continued to speak out. On April 5th, 1989, she was placed in front of a firing squad, and just before they were going to shoot her, a senior official stopped them. She was given the choice of staying in Burma under house arrest or leaving and enjoying her freedom. She stayed and continued a nonviolent campaign for democracy. A champion of democratic values, Ms. Suu Kyi raised support for human rights in Burma. Ms. Suu Kyi led the National League for Democracy to oppose Burma's military government. As a result, she was placed under house arrest in 1989. Ms. Suu Kyi is still there now as we give her this award. She has written this essay in her absence.
It is not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. Most Burmese are familiar with the 4 agadi, the 4 kinds of corruption. Sanagadi, corruption induced by desire, is deviation from the right path in pursuit of bribes or for the sake of those one loves. Dothagadi is taking the wrong path to spite those against whom one bears ill will. And Margagadi is aberration due to ignorance. But perhaps the worst of the 4 is Bayagadi. For not only does Baya, fear, stifle, and slowly destroy all sense of right and wrong, it so often lies at the root of the other 3 kinds of corruption. Just as sandagadi, when not the result of sheer avarice, can be caused by fear of want or fear of losing the goodwill of those one loves, so fear of being surpassed, humiliated, or injured in some way can provide the impetus for ill will. And it would be difficult to dispel ignorance unless there is freedom to pursue the truth unfettered by fear. With so close a relationship between fear and corruption, it is little wonder that in any society where fear is rife, corruption in all forms becomes deeply entrenched. Public dissatisfaction with economic hardships has been seen as the chief cause of the movement for democracy in Burma, sparked off by the student demonstrations in 1988. It is true that years of incoherent policies, inept official measures, burgeoning inflation, and falling real income had turned the country into economic shambles. But it was more than the difficulties of eking out a barely acceptable standard of living that has eroded the patience of a traditionally good-natured, quiescent people. It was also the humiliation of a way of life disfigured by corruption and fear. The students were protesting not just against the death of their comrades, but against the denial of their right to life by a totalitarian regime, which deprived the present of meaningfulness and held out no hope for the future. And because the students' protests articulated the frustrations of the people at large, the demonstrations quickly grew into a nationwide movement. The people of Burma had wearied of a precarious state of passive apprehension, where they were as water in cupped hands of the powers that be. Emerald cool we may be, as water in cupped hands, but oh, that we might be as splinters of glass in cupped hands. Glass splinters, the smallest with its sharp, glinting power to defend itself against hands that tried to crush, could be seen as a vivid symbol of the spark of courage that is an essential attribute of those who would free themselves from the grip of oppression. The effort necessary to remain uncorrupted in an environment where fear is an integral part of everyday existence is not immediately apparent to those fortunate enough to live in states governed by the rule of law. Just laws do not merely prevent corruption by meting out impartial punishment to offenders. They also help to create a society in which people can fulfill the basic requirements necessary for the preservation of human dignity without recourse to corrupt practices. Where there are no such laws, the burden of upholding the principles of justice and common decency falls on the ordinary people. It is the cumulative effect on their sustained effort and steady endurance which will change a nation where reason and conscience are warped by fear into one where legal rules exist to promote man's desire for harmony and justice while restraining the less desirable destructive traits in his nature. In an age when immense technological advances have created lethal weapons which could be and are used by the powerful and the unprincipled to dominate the weak and the helpless, there is a compelling need for a closer relationship between politics and ethics. Every individual and every organ of society should strive to promote the basic rights and freedoms to which all human beings, regardless of race, nationality, or religion, are entitled. But as long as there are governments whose authority is founded on coercion rather than on the mandate of the people, and interest groups which place short-term profits above long-term peace and prosperity, concerted international action to protect and promote human rights will remain at best a partially realized struggle. There will continue to be arenas of struggle where victims of oppression have to draw on their own inner resources to defend their inalienable rights as members of the human family. The quintessential revolution is that of the spirit, born of an intellectual conviction of the need for change in those mental attitudes and values which shape the course of a nation's development. A revolution which aims merely at changing official policies and institutions with a view to an improvement in material conditions has little chance of genuine success. Without a revolution of the spirit, the forces which produce the iniquities of the old order would continue to be operative, posing a constant threat to the process of reform and regeneration. It is not enough to merely call for freedom, democracy, and human rights. There has to be a united determination to persevere in the struggle, to make sacrifices in the name of enduring truths, to resist the corrupting influences of desire, ill will, ignorance, and fear. Among the basic freedoms to which men aspire that their lives might be full and uncramped, freedom from fear stands out as both a means and an end. A people who would build a nation in which strong, democratic institutions are firmly established as a guarantee against state-induced power must first learn to liberate their own minds from apathy and fear. Within a system which denies the existence of basic human rights, fear tends to be the order of the day. A most insidious form of fear is that which masquerades as common sense or even wisdom, condemning as foolish, reckless, insignificant, or futile the small daily acts of courage which help to preserve man's self-respect and inherent human dignity. It is not easy for a people conditioned by fear under the iron rule of the principle that might is right to free themselves from the enervating miasma of fear. Yet even under the most crushing state, courage rises up again and again, for fear is not the natural state of civilized man. The wellspring of courage and endurance in the face of unbridled power is generally a firm belief in the sanctity of ethical principles combined with a historical sense that despite all setbacks, the condition of man is set on an ultimate course for both spiritual and mental advancement. It is his capacity for self-improvement and self-redemption which most distinguishes man from the mere brute. At the root of human responsibility is the concept of perfection, the urge to achieve it, the intelligence to find a path towards it, and the will to follow the path, if not to the end, at least the distance needed to rise above individual limitations and environmental impediments. It is man's vision of a world fit for rational, civilized humanity, which leads him to dare and to suffer to build societies free from want and fear. Concepts such as truth, justice, and compassion cannot be dismissed as trite, when these are often the only bulwarks which stand against ruthless power. Thank you.
Thank you, Ten Boom. On deck, we have the House of Susan B. Anthony. And please welcome to the stage the House of C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yeah!
Order, please. Gentlemen of the House of Commons, the House is called to order on this 4th of June for matters most grave. The events of the past few weeks have been dire. Following the German rout of the French force at Sudan, the entire polity of France has fallen to the hands of the Führer almost overnight. A force consisting of nearly 3,600 armored vehicles has cut us off from what remains of the French army, followed closely by countless masses of Nazi infantry. With this massive force rapidly closing in on our entrenchments, our expeditionary force was forced to abandon our allies in Belgium and retreat to the coastal cities of Calais, Dunkirk, and Boulogne. Our guardsmen in Boulogne and Calais will be set by the encircling Nazi forces, and though they fought proudly and without water, I am sorry to say they perished to the last man. Although most of our expeditionary force at Dunkirk was saved due to a remarkable collaboration between our Royal Navies, aerocraft, and citizens of the Commonwealth, our losses in the European mainland are near total. Our ambassadors tell me that neither Mussolini nor Roosevelt are willing to aid us. In a word, gentlemen of the House, we're rinsed. Now then, our new Prime Minister, Churchill, has motioned to address the House. The man who's promised to win our war. Well, we've given you our blood, toil, sweat, and tears, Mr. Churchill, and yet I wonder what you have to say to us on the very eve of our defeat. Europe was not ready for this war. We were not ready. The House recognizes your motion, Minister Churchill. You may have the floor.
When a week ago today, I asked the House to fix this afternoon as the occasion for a statement, I feared it would be my hard lot to announce the greatest military disaster in our long history. The whole root and core of the brain of the British Army, on which and around which we were to build, and are to build the great British armies in the later years of the war, seemed about to perish upon the field or to be led into an ignominious and starving captivity. The enemy attacked on all sides with great strength and fierceness, and their main power, the power of their far more numerous air force, was thrown into the battle, or else concentrated upon Dunkirk and the beaches. Pressing in upon the narrow exit, both from the east and from the west, the enemy began to fire with cannon upon the beaches by which alone the shipping could approach or depart. They sowed magnetic mines in the channels and seas. They sent repeated waves of hostile aircraft, sometimes more than 100 strong in one formation, to cast their bombs upon the single pier that remained and upon the sand dunes upon which the troops had their eyes for shelter. For 4 or 5 days, an intense struggle reigned. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy, with the willing help of countless merchant seamen, strained every nerve to embark the British and Allied troops. 220 light warships and 650 other vessels were engaged. They had to operate upon the difficult coast, often in adverse weather, under an almost ceaseless hail of bombs and increasing concentration of artillery fire. It was in conditions such as these that our men carried on, with little or no rest, for days and nights on end, making trip after trip across the dangerous waters, bringing with them always men whom they had rescued. The numbers they have brought back are the measure of their devotion and their courage. Meanwhile, the Loyal Air Force, which had already been intervening in the battle, now used part of its main metropolitan fighter strength and struck at the German bombers and at the fighters which in large numbers protected them. A miracle of deliverance, achieved by valor, by perseverance, by perfect discipline, by faultless service, by skill, by unconquerable fidelity, is manifest to us all. The Royal Air Force engaged the main strength of the German Air Force and inflicted upon them losses of at least 4-1. And the Navy, using nearly 1,000 ships of all kinds, carried over 335,000 men, French and British, out of the jaws of death and shame to their native land and to the tasks which lie ahead. We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations, but there was a victory inside this deliverance, which should be noted. It was gained by the Air Force. We got the army away, and they have paid fourfold for any losses which they have inflicted. Very large formations of German aeroplanes, and we know that they are a very brave race, have turned on several occasions from the attack on 1/4 of their number of the Royal Air Force, and have dispersed in different directions. 12 aeroplanes have been hunted by 2. 1 aeroplane was driven into the water and cast away by the mere charge of a British aeroplane, which had no more ammunition. All of our types, the Hurricane, the Spitfire, and the new Defiant, and all our pilots have been vindicated as too superior as what they have at present to face. I take occasion to express the sympathy of the House to all who have suffered bereavement or who are still anxious. The President of the Board of Trade, Sir Andrew Duncan, is not here today. His son has been killed, and many in the House have felt the pangs of affliction in the sharpest form. Against this loss of over 30,000 men, we consider a far heavier loss certainly inflicted upon the enemy, but our losses in material are enormous. We have perhaps lost 1/3 of the men we lost in the opening days of the Battle of the 21st of March, 1918, but we have lost nearly as many guns, nearly 1,000, and all our transport, all the armored vehicles that were with the army in the north. This loss will impose a further delay on the expansion of our military strength. How long will it be, how long it will last, depends upon the exertions which we make in this island. An effort the like of which has never been seen in our records is now being made. Work is proceeding everywhere, night and day. Capital and labor have cast aside their interests, rights, and customs to put them into the common stock. Already the flow of munitions has leaped forwards. There is no reason why we should not in a few months overtake the sudden and serious loss that has come upon us without retarding the development of our general program. Nevertheless, our thankfulness at the escape of the army and so many men whose loved ones have passed through an agonizing week must not blind us to the fact that what has happened in France and Belgium is a colossal military disaster. The French army has been weakened, the Belgian army has been lost, and a large part of these fortified lines upon which so much faith has been reposed is gone. Many valuable mining districts and factories have passed into the enemy's possession. The whole of the Channel ports are in his hands, with all the tragic consequences that follow from that. And we must expect another blow to be struck almost immediately at us or France. We are told that Herr Hitler has a plan for invading the British Isles. The whole question of home defense against invasion is, of course, powerfully affected by the fact that we have, for the time being in this island, incomparably more powerful military forces than we have ever had in any moment in this war and the last. This will not continue. We shall not be content with a defensive war. We have our duty to our ally. We have to reconstitute and build up the British Expeditionary Force once again, under its gallant Commander-in-Chief, Lord Gort. In the days of Napoleon, the same wind which would have carried his transports across the Channel might have driven away the blockading fleet. There is always the chance, and it is this chance that has excited and befooled the imaginations of many continental tyrants. Many are the tales that are told. We are sure that novel methods will be adopted, and when we see the originality of malice, the ingenuity of aggression which our enemy displays, we may certainly prepare ourselves for every kind of novel stratagem and every kind of brutal and treacherous maneuver. I think that no idea is so outlandish that it should not be considered and viewed with a searching, but at the same time, I hope, with a steady eye. We must never forget the solid assurances of sea power and those which belong to air power if it can be locally exercised. I have, myself, full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made, as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once again able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary, alone. At least, at any rate, that is what we are going to try to do. That is the resolve of His Majesty's government, every man of them. That is the will of Parliament and the nation. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and the odious apparatus of the Nazi rule, We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight in the seas and the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it was subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, in all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
Thank you.
Lots of broken bottles of beer because that's bloody well.
On deck we have the House of XVIII. And please welcome to the stage the House of Susan B.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today here in Rochester, New York. My name is Alexander Berkman. I am a humble man with humble beginnings. I was born in Vilna, Russia, and immigrated to the United States in 1888. I thought I found a new home here, but in America, I found more bondage, more sadness, and more greed than I thought possible. For almost a year, we have sat back watching the world devolve into chaos. What started as the assassination of one man in Austria has evolved into world war. It is 1915. No nation state should be so heartless as to fight over the earth's resources, paying with the blood of our children. But we are ready for a new world. We are ready for a new ideal. We are ready for a new reality that prioritizes humanity over state dominance. What we want, what we are ready for is anarchy. We are part of a new generation that will usher in a new era where humanity is not tied by a domineering government, but a peaceful state of human friendship. You are here with us because you also see the vision that we do, and you are willing to join us in the fight for this new world. To that end, I wish to turn it over to a woman dedicated to our vision, a woman you all know well for her resilient commitment to the anarchist political cause. Her life has been full of struggle against government power. Ever since the tragic death of 11 people at the Chicago bombing of Haymarket, she has pushed forward the needs of the working class. Her activism is not limited to the American workplace, but extends internationally. She ardently fights the foolishness of military preparation and useless bloodshed, a subject she will expand on today. She's a personal, close friend of mine, and I believe she is the greatest freethinker and rebel woman of our times. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the woman of the hour, Emma Goldman.
the beginning of the European conflagration, the whole human race has fallen into the deathly grip of war, overcome by the mad, teeming fumes of a blood-soaked chloroform, which has obscured its vision and paralyzed its heart. The human mind seems to be conscious of but one thing: murderous speculation. Our whole civilization, our entire culture is concentrated in the mad demand for the most perfected weapons of slaughter. America is essentially the melting pot. No national unit composing it is in the position to boast a superior race, particular historic mission, or higher culture. Yet, the jingles and war speculators are filling the air with the sentimental slogan of hypocritical nationalism. America for Americans. America first, last, and all the time. The pathos of all of this, the America which is to be protected by a huge military force, is not the America of the people, but that of the privileged class, the class which robs and exploits the masses and controls their lives from the cradle to the grave. No less pathetic is it that so few people realize that preparedness never leads to peace, but that this is indeed the road to universal slaughter. The terrible European war is only the culminating fruition of the hydra-headed gospel, military preparedness. Since the war began, miles of paper and oceans of ink have been used to prove the barbarity, the cruelty, the oppression of Prussian militarism. Conservatives and radicals alike are giving their support to the Allies for no other reason than to help crush that militarism, in the presence of which they say there can be no peace or progress in Europe. Even Woodrow Wilson, who not so long ago indulged in the phrase, "a nation too proud to fight," who at the beginning of the war ordered prayers for peace, who in his proclamation spoke of the necessity of watchful waiting. Even he has been whipped into line. The difference between Wilson and Roosevelt is this: Roosevelt, a born bully, uses the club. Wilson, the historian, the college professor, bears a smooth, polished university mask. But underneath it, he, like Roosevelt, has but one aim: to serve the big interests, to add to those who are growing phenomenally rich by the manufacture of military supplies, to oppose the institutions of our country, that is, the institutions which protect and sustain a handful of people in the robbery and plunder of the masses, the institutions which drain the blood of the native as well as the foreigner and turn it into wealth and power, the institutions which turn wealth into power, the institutions which rob the alien of whatever originality he brings with him, and in return, gives him cheap Americanism. The very proclaimers of America first have long before this betrayed the fundamental principles of real Americanism. That the best government is that which governs least. You cannot conduct war with equals. You cannot have militarism with free-born men. You must have slaves, machines, obedient, disciplined creatures who will move, act, shoot, and kill on the command. That is preparedness and nothing else. Preparedness will only add to the power of the privileged few and help them to subdue and to enslave and crush labor. Just as it is with all the other institutions in our confused life, which were supposedly created for the good of the people and have accomplished the very reverse. So it will be with preparedness. Supposedly, America is to prepare for peace, but in reality, it will be the cause of war. It always has been thus, all through blood-stained history, and it will continue until nations will refuse to fight against nation, until the people of the world will stop preparing for slaughter. Preparedness is like the seed of a poisonous plant. Placed in the soil, it will bear poisonous fruit. Militarism consumes the strongest and most productive elements of each nation. Militarism swallows the largest part of the national revenue. Almost nothing is spent on education, art, literature, and science compared with the amount devoted to militarism in times of peace. While in times of war, everything else is set at naught. All life stagnates. All effort is curtailed. But the most dominant factor of military preparedness, and the one which inevitably leads to war, is the creation of group interest, which consciously and deliberately work for the increase of armament, whose purposes are furthered by creating the war hysteria. It is not at all unlikely that the history of the present war will trace its origin to this international murder trust. But it is always necessary for one generation to wade through the oceans of blood and heap up mountains of human sacrifices, that the next generation may learn a grain of truth. Can we of today not profit by the cause which led to the European war? Above all, can we not realize that preparedness in America must and will lead to the same result, the same barbarity, the same senseless sacrifice of life? It is not enough to claim to be neutral. A neutrality which sheds crocodile tears with one eye and keeps the other riveted upon the profits of the war supplies and war loans is not neutrality. It is a hypocritical cloak to cover their country's crimes. Nor is it enough to join the bourgeois pacifists who proclaim peace among the nations, while helping to perpetrate the war among the classes. It is this war of the classes that we must concentrate upon. And in that connection, the war against false values, against evil institutions, against all social atrocities. That alone will enable them to inoculate to the coming generation a new ideal of brotherhood. That alone leads to economic and social freedom and does away with all wars, all crimes, and all injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, House of SBA. Next up, please welcome to the stage the House of Queen Elizabeth I.
Good evening. My name is Dame Dorothy Tangney. It is my great honor to be the first woman elected to the Australian National Senate.
But it is not as a woman that I have been elected to this chamber. It is as a citizen of the Commonwealth. And I take my place here with the full privileges and rights of all honorable senators. And what is most still important, the full responsibilities with such a high office entails. I know I have my history of making long speeches, but I promise to keep this one short. My purpose in coming before you all today is to introduce to you a close colleague of mine, Dame Enid Lyons. Like me, Dame Lyons was also elected this past election cycle, making her the first woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. An exceptional feat, seeing how she was also busy keeping track of her 11 children. While I never married, similar to a beloved red-headed queen of old, I understand Dame Lyons' emphasis on the connection between home life and the influence of the community and state has on it. She is a woman, a mother, and a longtime observer of the political world. A unique combination of perspectives her colleagues do not share. As you will hear, this perspective influences all facets of the topics we debate in the House and Senate, including Social Security policies, restoring the declining birth rate, and assimilating returning soldiers. By the time our men return from the Second Great War, it will be too late to fix the cracks in our nation's foundations, the homes of its people. Readiness and character building starts at home. This is important as the family is the cornerstone of society. This leads and builds the overall state of the nation, whose goal is to usher in the golden age and city of God. The golden age we all dream of won't come on its own. We must get ready for the future by actively working towards it and keeping our minds set on our past. Ushering in the golden age will also require us to ready ourselves for any dangerous threat presented to our great nation while joining the forces of good to establish peace. Without further ado, I would like to present my colleague, Dame Enid Lyons, the first woman to address the House of one of its elected members. Yes, she is indeed a woman, but more importantly, a citizen of Australia, who has observed the nation's political sphere for some time, but has now entered the halls of power on her own.
It would be strange indeed were I not tonight deeply conscious of the fact, if not a little awed by the knowledge, that on my shoulders rests a great weight of responsibility, because this is the first occasion upon which a woman has addressed this House. For that reason, it is an occasion which, for every woman in the Commonwealth, marks in some degree a turning point in history. I know that many honourable members have viewed the advent of women to the legislative halls with something approaching alarm. I believe very sincerely that any woman entering the public arena must be prepared to work as men work. She must justify herself not as a woman, but as a citizen. She must attack the same problems and be prepared to shoulder the same burdens. But because I am a woman and cannot divest myself of those qualities which are inherent in my sex, and because every one of us speaks broadly in the terms of one's own experience, honourable members will have to become accustomed to homely metaphors of the kitchen, rather than those of the operating theatre, the workshop, or the farm. They must also become accustomed to all kinds of measures of the touchstone of their effect upon the home and the family life. I hope that no one will imagine that that implies in any way a limitation of my political interests. Rather, it implies an ever-widening outlook on every problem that faces the world today, every subject, from high finance to international relations, from social security to the winning of the war, touches very closely the home and family. The late King George V said, "The foundation of a nation's greatness is in the homes of its people." Therefore, I am even more concerned with national character than with national effort. Somewhere about the year 1830, there began a period in Australian history, which for me has always held a peculiar fascination. I should like to have been alive in the days when all the great social and political movements were born, because during all those years, very much of what we now know as Australian character was formed. Hatred of oppression, love of a fair go, a passion for justice. It was in those years that we developed those qualities of initiative and daring, which have marked our men in every war in which they have fought, qualities which I hope will never be allowed to die. We are today an organized community which no longer exists purely upon the initiative of its individual members. And if we would serve Australia well, we must preserve those characteristics which were formed during that early period of our history. I have been delighted to find the almost unanimity that exists in respect of the need for social service and many of the other problems that have been discussed in this chamber. In the matter of social security, one thing stands out clearly in my mind. Such things are necessary in order that the weak shall not go to the wall, that the strong may be supported, that all may have justice. But we must never so blanket ourselves that those fine national qualities of which I have spoken shall no longer have play. I know so well that fear, want, and idleness can kill the spirit of any people. But I know too that security can be bought at too great a cost, the cost of spiritual freedom. How then may we strike a balance? There is one answer. I would insist that every person in the community in receipt of any income whatsoever must make some contribution to the fund for social security. I want it to be an act of conscious citizenship. I want every child to be taught that when he begins to earn, then for the first time he will have the first privilege and right of citizenship, to begin to contribute to the great scheme that has been designed to serve him when he is no longer able to work, and to help all those who at any period of their lives may meet with distress or trouble. In such a scheme, I believe there should be pensions for all. There should be no means test, but everyone, however little he or she earns, should contribute something as a sort of token payment for the advantage of Australian citizenship. I am delighted that the Honourable Member for Denison, Dr. Gaha, should have secured the honour of having introduced to this chamber the subject of population. I, like him, have pondered on this subject, not with my feet upon the mantelpiece, but knee-deep in shoals and feeding bottles. I have pondered it, surrounded by those who, by their very numbers, have done quite a good deal to boost the population of Australia. I believe that I have at least tried out some of the theories which would make for a better population, and I know some of the difficulties that present themselves to any person who in these days desires to rear a family. There has to be considered the fact that, unless we fill this country, we shall have no justification in the years that are ahead for holding it at all. It would be well to go back and look for the reasons for the decline of population. Two main reasons are ascribed. The first, the growth of industrialism and the changed conditions resulting therefrom. Population became urban instead of rural, and the conditions in which children were brought up became less suitable. Still another reason for the declining birth rate is sometimes advanced, a reason belonging to the moral rather than to the economic sphere. It is to be found in that strange reluctance to reproduce themselves that has overtaken the peoples of the past in the final years of their decline. I agree that we cannot hope merely by economic measures to increase the birth rate. Certain things are necessary to be done in order to ease the burden on families, but they must be looked upon only as measures of justice to those who are prepared to face their responsibilities. Those things cannot in themselves revive the falling birth rate. We must look to the basic wage, which at present provides for the needs of 3 children for every man who receives it. Yet how many thousands of men in this country have no children at all? The basic wage is meagre enough in all conscience. Let the man's wages be a direct charge upon industry, but the children should be a charge on the whole community. If we hope to increase the birth rate, we must look to a resurgence of the national spirit. We must look to a new concept of the dignity and worth of the family in the social order. The family is the matrix of humanity, the secret laboratory in which every unit of human society is organized and maintained. And if that laboratory is disorganized or chaotic, the most serious disorders in social life must be expected. Let us pause for a moment and think of the time when the war shall end. All too many people believe that by the attainment of victory, we shall step straight into the golden age. Nothing could be more foolish, because the golden age will arrive only when you and I and everyone else have made some contribution towards it. We shall have to plan for it and work for it and sacrifice ourselves for it. We must be prepared, particularly the women, to hold in stability those who have come back still in the grip of the restlessness engendered by war. Now let me turn just for a moment to the international sphere. Some honourable members have assured us that there can never be any hope that mankind will escape the horror of war that descends upon the world every now and then. Others have assured us that by international coordination, we can usher in very quickly the reign of peace. I stand somewhere between the two schools of thought. Because of what has happened to me in this war, I have become disillusioned. For years, I went about the world preaching the gospel of peace and friendship and cooperation. I believed with all my heart in disarmament, but I can never again advocate such a policy. I believe that we must arm ourselves to meet whatever danger may threaten us. But I also believe that we must cooperate with all those forces of good that are working for peace, and with all those people who have a will to peace, so that we may do whatever lies in our power to preserve peace in our time. The other evening, I, in common with many other honourable members, saw a film dealing with the war in Europe. There was one scene which portrayed the evacuation from Dunkirk. The picture showed a mist on the water, and the voice of the announcer said, and then out of the mist there came a strange flotilla. Warships and fishing smacks and craft of all kinds filled the sea. It was the sea-going English. Come, rescue their own. And I felt, as I believe every other person felt who saw that picture, that this indeed was one of the greatest moments in the history of our race. I thought then, as I think now, that we should not fail occasionally to pause and look back upon the great moments of our past. I think that every Australian should pause now and again and say to himself, only 150 years ago, this land was wilderness. Now we have great cities, and this is still a land of promise. We cannot afford to neglect some recognition of our past, even though we gaze into the future. It was said in this chamber that the problems of government were not problems of blue books, not problems of statistics, but problems of human values and human hearts and human feelings. That, it seems to me, is a concept of government that we might well cherish. It is certainly one that I hold very dear. I hope that I shall never forget that everything that takes place in this chamber goes out somewhat to strike a human heart, to influence the life of some fellow being. And I believe this too, with all my heart, that the duty of every government, whether in this country or any other, is to see that no man, because of the condition of his life, shall ever need lose his vision of the city of God.
Thank you. Can we give one more round of applause for everyone that spoke today? You guys all did amazing. Before you leave, a few announcements. In order to get credit for this event, you need to come see either an Interregnum committee member wearing one of these shirts, or find your house member wearing a lanyard. They are your liaison. A reminder that you do have to be back here at 6:30 promptly for the film viewing. Each house has 10 chairs designated to them within the city room. Immediately following the film viewing, we will be doing award announcements. So if you want to have some representatives in the city room, should you guys win something, please make sure you know who those 10 people are beforehand. You guys are free to go. We'll be delivering noms at some point in the next 4 hours, so be prepared for that. And we'll see you in a little while. Thank you, guys.
Nice shirt, Corrie. What? Nice shirt.
That's right.
The line at the end is something he actually said to someone afterwards. You got credit.
Yeah, I know.
This is weird.
This?
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah, that I
didn't get it back till 8:45.
Oh, no, I'm not it's different from the norm. Okay, so let's make sure we're not riding that scooter around here now. We're not supposed to be riding the scooter around campus.
Oh, is that specifically the King's Rules?
Yeah. It's specific to good practice.
Just before we engage them, I'll take a look.
Don't say anything.
I'll take a look at my handbook and get back to you on it.
They don't have a computer impairment, so they can't touch it.
Just letting you know. But you guys both need to meet with someone.
Sorry.
I think it's someone on executive.
Stop writing.
Okay, can we just put it away, please?
Okay.
It's a safety hazard. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm on the emergency phone. I don't want anyone.
We can sneak in at the end.
I'll be back to it in a few hours.
You don't even need to worry about it, Joshua. It's not that big of a deal.
I'll probably stay downstairs this week.
And they don't necessarily have a legal party.
That's
I'm like, this isn't enough on my end. This is much more kind of just.
Yeah. Like women's rights.
Thank you so much. Did you see my cute video on the email I sent out?
You just did not say that.
Doing great. Are you nervous when you get up and talk? Yeah, you just because like what I'm saying.